Hello and welcome to Differential Discussions. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Dave.
And today we're moving on from red cells finally, and we're going to talk about white cells.
That's the interesting stuff.
I know, right? The stuff that everyone is like waiting for the white cells. They're waiting for the leukemias, actually, not this, but
walk before you run, right? This is
yeah, absolutely. So we thought we'd start off with talking about neutrophil maturation before we moved into any of the abnormal states. We've already done a normal diff, and that included white cells and reds. So we're going to move from this, and then we'll start talking about abnormals right after this. So we figured start with normals for whites, and then we'll move on to the more abnormal stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense to me.
All right, so we're starting with neutrophil maturation. We call it myelopoiesis, the development of our myelocytic lineages, and specifically we're going to focus on the neutrophilic lineage today. So the first recognizable cell is the blast, myeloblast. Typically, morphologically, you can't really tell the difference between a myeloblast, a lymphoblast, a megakaryoblast, a monoblast, etc., etc. So if you really want to know, you have to confirm by flow cytometry what type of blast it is, but we know these are myeloblasts. So examples of myeloblasts, first recognizable cells.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, some people might want to say they can tell the difference, and sometimes we kind of can. There'll be little clues, but they're just guesses at the end of the day, right? But a blast.
Yep. Yeah. Generally, when we're calling as part of a diff, you just call it a blast. We don't usually put myeloblasts. The type of blast is just usually a blast. All right. So what are the characteristics with this blast then?
Yes. So size is a thing, right? Cell size.
Yeah.
Blasts tend to be a bit larger. But I mean, the main thing would be the chromatin pattern. But then maybe first just touch the cytoplasm. Typically a blue cytoplasm, right? So kind of boring there. It's the nucleus now is where the defining kind of traits, characteristics. And there's lots of different words to describe the texture of the nucleus. I've heard it all.
Yep.
And certain terminology might connect more with different people. So teaching with the terms is tricky. But generally speaking, you have, and give me your version of this too, Melissa. But you have a homogeneous chromatin pattern that's kind of like loose and soft. I hear you have nucleoli. These are the circular or oval type shapes. Yep, excellent. There's one right there. But yeah, it's them when you see them.
Yeah. So let's back up a hair. So the cytoplasm is blue. Generally, the cytoplasm is really blue because it's got a lot of RNA in it, and RNA stains blue. So this is the same. Remember, we talked about that with erythrocytes and reticulocytes. It's the same thing. There's a lot of RNA in the cytoplasm, so the cytoplasm is blue in blasts because the only function of a blast is to grow, divide, differentiate.
Right. And some of those granules haven't come to pass yet, right? Yep.
Yeah, and in the neutrophilic lineage, it is starting to synthesize myeloperoxidase. It just hasn't packaged it into granules yet. Yeah, and so the cytoplasm is blue because of the RNA. The nucleus generally takes up the majority of the cell. Yeah, and it does have that nice, fluffy, homogeneous, almost velvety sort of look to the chromatin in the nucleus. And then, of course, the nucleoli are the hole punch. They look like you punched a hole in the nucleus with a hole puncher. Remember, the nucleoli are the areas where DNA is unwound, and it's going through the creation of making mRNA, packaging mRNA, processing mRNA to ship out of the nucleus. So that's the nucleoli. And there's frequently multiple, especially once you get into the leukemic versions of these cells. There's generally multiple, especially in the myelocytic lineage. But yes, that's why they have nucleoli. It's packaging that mRNA and sending it out. And of course, the chromatin pattern is so homogeneous because there's a lot of euchromatin. So it's all the fresh chromatin that's actively being used.
Right.
Okay, and then of course, Dave said they're usually very large. In general, myeloblasts are very large. Occasionally there are microblasts where they're about the same size as the red cell, but for the most part, they're going to be 2 or 3 times bigger than the red cells around them.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see, like, just even these 2 blasts here, this chromatin is still homogeneous. There's a few areas where you can see color, but for the most part, it's homogeneous. Nice prominent nucleoli in there, but it's got a little bit more cytoplasm than this guy does. Yeah. That will just vary by patient.
Sure.
So it depends on the patient, as my students hear me say all the time and probably hate.
Yeah, we're kind of like the weathermen, right? Like we're just like, yeah, you know.
Hopefully we're a little bit more accurate though.
I know.
All right, so that's a blast. All right, the next stage of neutrophil development is the promyelocyte.
Yep. So this is one of the prettiest stages visually. And I like that we have 2 different kind of representations of a promyelocyte. So this is when the primary granules become present, and the cytoplasm in its youngest, in the younger promyelocytes, will still be deeply basophilic, very, very blue. And then you have these beautiful azurophilic, kind of pinkly, made a word there, purpley granules. But as it transitions, the blue can get a little like washed out. I don't know if that's the term for it. It gets a little lighter. You still have pretty prominent nucleoli. There's still an awful lot of transcription, translation, and you know, all that goodies, good stuff kind of going on. The nucleus is generally still round-ish, right? At this point,
so usually takes up a good chunk of the cell, the nucleus.
Yeah, cell size, NC ratio, yeah, close to the blast. So
one way you could look at this is just a blast, because it has similar features of a blast, just with primary granules, and the primary granules are large and they are in the cytoplasm and on top of the nucleus.
Oh, great point. Yeah, them being on top of the nucleus. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah,
bring that up.
You may notice in these cells though that the nucleus is a little eccentrically placed. And so not all pros will have that, because the blast stage, it's the majority of the cell. And a lot of the pros are still majority of the cell, but now they're becoming eccentrically placed, because you'll notice as the cell develops, the nucleus stays eccentrically placed. So it's strategic that it's starting. It just happens these 2 are both eccentrically. Eccentrically just means not centered. It means off to the side, if you're wondering what eccentric means. So here you have this one that's kind of pushed off over here, very, very round. And this one's still kind of making shapes, and like not making shapes, but is a little bit more larger and spreadier than this guy's, but it's still pushed off to the side, eccentrically placed.
Cool.
All right, and then just for completeness, the granules are containing that myeloperoxidase now. So those are those primary granules that have the oxygen necessary kill capacity that the neutrophils will have. All right, next stage, myelocyte.
So now these stages start to get a little trickier, right? This is when students start to have heartburn. So at the myelocyte, we start to, again, we have a spectrum of myelocytes, right? So like sometimes they'll be a little bit more blue, as you see in the middle one here. There's still that rich kind of blue background. And then as it gets a little bit older, it really starts to look a lot like a neutrophil as it kind of grows up.
Yep.
The chromatin now is you're going to start to see like clumping is going to be much more apparent now. As the cell kind of has made the stuff it needs the DNA less and less, it starts to get packaged away.
There's no nucleoli.
No nucleoli. Yep. Right.
You might see a remnant though. You might see a remnant of a nucleoli, which is generally kind of washed out looking compared to what the nucleoli generally look like. But yeah, they no longer have nucleoli at this stage.
And this is a stage 2 where you'll start to see perhaps one side of it flatten off. And yeah, we could see that in that younger one there.
You can see a little bit right here too.
Mm-hmm. And that will kind of, you know, bleed into the next stage characterization.
One thing I like to point out is this is a younger myelocyte, so you can see that it's basically, you have half over here, the primary granules, and you have the secondary granules over here, which are the specific granules. They're the neutrophilic granules. So what happens is when you pour your secondary granules out of your Golgi apparatus, which is this poorly staining area right here or right here, then you see that your primary granules are pushed to one side and your secondary granules populate. And as the cell matures, they'll evenly mix throughout the cytoplasm. It just takes some time. So you may see younger myelocytes or older myelocytes on your peripheral blood smears. You don't differentiate, this is a young myelocyte, this is an old, it's just we put it there for educational purposes, just so that you understand why they may look slightly different.
Yeah, I try to like explain it to people is to think about the age of the cell from blast to neutrophil as on this continuum, this line of maturation. And we've designated these cutoff points to categorize, and it's helpful, but it's a little blurry sometimes, and it's not as clean, you know. So, and other thing I want to bring up too is one might look at the coloration on this young myelocyte and kind of go, oh man, I think that's a pro, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that stands out to me where I would make the decision that this is a myelocyte comes from the chromatin itself. And as you learn cell morphology, I hope that you start to lean on the chromatin more and more and more for staging, because what we see in that center cell there is a lot of dark areas of clumping in the nucleus, and that's signifying some kind of age, so to speak. So that would be the thing that kind of like, you know, really clues me in some myelocyte.
And just let's just draw. So like you can see like here is like right here, there's a dark, deep dark spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then here there's another deep dark spot. And then the rest has kind of, there's a few little deep dark spots over here. There's a little one over here. But now you're mostly seeing light purple and white lines through the light purple. But these are the areas of developing heterochromatin, which is the chromatin that's being packaged up for no longer being used. And so that's what you're starting to see in these myelocytic cells, is the cell starting to kind of package up that DNA for no longer being used. And it's important to also say that the myelocyte is the last stage that will go through mitosis.
Mm.
After this, if you get one metamyelocyte, you get one neutrophil. So this is the last cell that goes through mitosis. I generally call the dividing line the line of mitosis. Just
you actually made a drawing that I keep to this day. It's I have it on the desk. It's very helpful.
Yep. Yes. We draw cells, but you know, that's okay. That's a different thing. Okay, and then over here we just have another example of a myelocyte. Nice round, eccentrically offset to the side. Like these are round in the center-ish, but they're also like, you can tell this is kind of eccentrically placed, where this is where the changes are happening here. Same thing with, you can tell this is where the changes are happening here. This is where the Golgi apparatus is, right? On here, you can tell he's eccentrically placed. This is that little flat edge. The flat edge is a little bit smaller on this one. Mm-hmm. And you have a Golgi apparatus here. There's also a vacuole right there, but the Golgi apparatus is right here. Mm-hmm. I think it's also important to say that you may not see a Golgi apparatus.
Yeah.
Especially when you're looking at malignant cells. Yeah,
true. Yeah, malignancy really does throw a lot of the rules out the window. So you got to be a bit adaptive there. And in truth, in my mind, spotting that there's a malignancy is the most important thing. And sometimes we get lost in the weeds of categorizing a cell or two here or there. But yeah, malignancy really throws a wrench in the formula for how these cells should appear. But
yep.
We roll with it.
I think that's it for the myelo. We can move on to the meta. All right.
These get easier now.
Yeah, I know, right?
So that spot with a Golgi, where we would see the Golgi, it's going to now start to kind of fold in, right? And so we have a more mature meta on the left-hand side of the screen here and a less mature one on the right. But by this time, the cytoplasm is really looking like a neutrophil kind of cytoplasm.
Yeah.
And the nucleus is essentially just kind of starting to, what's the word for it?
Clump off.
Yeah.
Get ready to be not used anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it really is. At this stage, you developed those tertiary granules, which are like lysosomal granules and stuff. But really, other than that, we're done. We're mature in the cytoplasm here. So the cytoplasm is as mature as it's going to get. And so the nucleus now, its responsibility is really just to kind of clump off and segment into what we traditionally know as a neutrophilic nucleus. So it just starts to indent. We call it the kidney bean shape sometimes. Right. And see, this indent is a little bit bigger than this indent.
Yep.
But generally, we define the indent as being less than 50% the width of the nucleus. Say what? All right, so let's draw. So this is the width of this nucleus here. So 50%, if this indent is less than 50%, then it's still a metamyelocyte. So let's say 50% is about here. That is less than 50%. If your indent is greater than 50%, then you're looking at either a banned neutrophil or an adult neutrophil, depending on the nucleus and how you call cells. But if the indent is less than 50%, like it is here, then we're looking at a metamyelo. So both of these are less than 50%, so they are metas.
Right. And I do think there might be some people yelling at the screen calling the left-hand cell a band. And, this is an incredibly divisive topic in laboratories. It is extremely difficult to competently train staff to make these calls together. So there might be some people dissenting. We're just strictly trying to follow a set of rules that standardize the calling. And so meta call on the left, even though it's looking pretty mature.
Yeah, but again, it's the cytoplasm that looks really mature. If you look at the nucleus,
right,
it's just a little bit more mature than our myelo was.
Yeah. So then what's next?
Let's skip a sec. No, I'm just kidding. It's a band.
I personally have a vendetta against bands. I just not a big fan.
Dave and I both are very conservative when we call bands. They need to be perfect bands, meaning they can't have any bends or creaks or elbows or anything. They have to be perfect all the way around in width, and they have to be nice and even. Mm-hmm. So that is personally how we teach bands. Each institution may teach it slightly different. Yeah. Right. And so you need to conform to whatever the institution is that you're at. So we teach bands more conservatively because it's easier to go a little bit more liberally from conservatively, but it's not easy to go the other way. So true. And just the way that we define it, right? So like, I love the less than 50% rule. Mm-hmm. And then so you end up, we'll get to the other side of that rule, right? for calling just neutrophils and polys. So you end up with the band ends up having a very narrow definition, where it's essentially ends up being equally, spaced throughout. So, so again, just looking at 50%, this is about 50%. So that's way more than 50% indent. So it's not a metamyelocyte, and it has to be more mature than a meta, either a band, depending on your definition, or a neutrophil. And so I think we can both agree this is more as a band here. But again, it'll depend on where you are working and how you should call bands. Right. They'll calibrate you. Yeah. Whether you like it or not. All right. And then the last stage is the neutrophil. Yep. So similar cytoplasm to what we've seen since the meta, all those primary, secondary, tertiary granules, although it just looks like a pinky color. And remember, if you remove the granules from the cytoplasm, there really isn't a coloration to the cytoplasm. It's just kind of empty, semi-clearness.
Yeah, it's
like
like
a
a
hint
pale
of
blue kind of.
yeah, hint of a blue or hint of a gray, but there's really no real color to it. So when you take those granules out, there's nothing left. It's a granular cell. Normal is 3 to 5 lobes in a neutrophil, and each lobe or segment is connected by thin filaments. So you can see probably this one's the best here, where you can see a lobe and then this nice thin filament that connects it to the next one.
And we tend to use our imagination a little bit too, because spatially you have to think about, there's a lot of factors to how well a filament will be displayed, right? Because I can just take lobes and kind of three-dimensionally put them on top of each other, and it's going to be difficult to see. But we kind of know it when we see it. Like I think the cell in the top left, one might say, oh, there's no filaments there. And I would argue there probably is. We just can't quite see them because of the orientation. But one thing that rings true across all of these cells is the chromatin pattern is heavily clumped, very, very dark. These cells are done, with their translation, transcription, all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they use up their granules, they're not getting any more.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
One and done.
I mean, what's the lifespan of a neutrophil anyway, right? It's not particularly long. These cells turn over quite fast. And counterintuitively, not to talk about bone marrow, it's not really relevant now, but when you look at a bone marrow, and you might think that there would be more erythrocytic precursors, when in fact the majority of the bone marrow is actually the myeloid. And it's strictly because of the life cycle is quite short.
Yep.
They get in, get out, do their thing, and they do it well, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it for neutrophils, right?
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Right.
And this is a tricky topic. It certainly is. Be patient with yourself when learning maturation sequence.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging, especially, I mean, just looking at a myelo versus a meta, it's like, so it'll take everyone a while. It took us a while to learn it. So, we didn't start off running.
No. I tried to.
We probably started off crawling. All right. Well, I think that's it. So thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you'd like notifications whenever we post a new video. And feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email with comments or suggestions about future content. Thanks.